start with who are we? Great place to begin. I'm Jen Colton. I'm a senior strategy manager. Both John and I work for Trilogy Interactive, digital strategy firm. And as you can see here, I like to say we balance each other. We've got different vibes, East Coast vibes, love some bad puns. I'll be making the cringy jokes.
And my name is John Padua. I am the Vice President of Media Buying here at Trilogy Interactive. I am a data mad scientist, as in I like experimenting with a lot of data and seeing where it takes me. And one of my biggest things that I think is the most important when it comes to media buying is to quote unquote follow the evidence and test and see where it takes you. So hopefully this discussion here is going to be a good sample of the insight that we put into how we've survived without Facebook.
So why are we here? We are not here to say don't run Facebook ads. That's not why we're here. We are also not here to say throw all your money at Facebook, everything's fine. So we want to find a better balance than we believe that progressive space is currently operating under for ads.
And I think, that Monday was a very stark reminder of how tenuous this situation is. It's just like that. All of your campaigns can go quiet in a snap. Not quite a Thanos snap, but still a snap. But it is one of those things where you don't know sometimes whether or not your ads are going to be working, and that's a very disconcerting thing. So when this was particularly problematic at the start of the year. So I took over the department at the start of the year, and of course Facebook had their ads ban going the whole time, and of course the events of January 6th happened, and the ads ban just continued on indefinitely without any notification from Facebook of whether or not or when they're going to be taking this thing off their plates. So one, I felt terrible about my luck, but two, I also needed to figure out a plan. We needed to figure out how to survive. We needed to figure out how to move forward in a space without Facebook. So what we're going to go after today is we're going to be talking about what we like to call the cool kids of digital advertising, not Facebook, which is going to be a nice fun departure for many of us, and just talk through the wider realm of options that are available to us. And some of these you may have heard before, some of these you may have tried and they may not have worked, but I think the whole point of this is just to kind of like open our minds to what's available and possible.
Sweet. So looking at our plan, John previewed the other options. We want to spend some time with what exists, what is their strengths and weaknesses, and then dig in more in choosing a platform. So there's all these options. How do you know what's right for you? Starting off, other social media platforms. Thank you again, Monday, for the wealth of memes on this topic. When we're not looking at Facebook and Instagram, what other platforms are there? Well, for C3s, and I know we've got folks who are parts of C3s here, Twitter is still an option for you all. And that is a very specific audience. We've got Snapchat and TikTok. That is, obviously we know that as younger, but there are some other pieces that is video heavy. So ads should be video creative, and it's a place where most users stay on the platform. Anything that is very much used inside an app is somewhere where it's really difficult to get people to click to a landing page or click to another action. Another example of a social media platform is Reddit. And I wrote here, if you know it, you know it. It is very obvious to people on Reddit, which is not me, but John can talk more about it, whether someone has ever been on Reddit before and if their content makes any sense in the context of Reddit. John is my resident Reddit expert.
I consider myself to be somewhat of a Reddit connoisseur. I was following Wall Street Bets before they got popular, which is always a fun thing to do. There's also some great stuff, in terms of the land of AOC and some of the Reddits that are available themed to her. So it's a very interesting and I would say eclectic environment. I think you also get a bit more of what I would call a user base that is, I'd say, very active and kind of like involved in communities. And there, it's more message board than it is kind of like a liking platform. It is something that I think is a pretty interesting opportunity, and I think we've seen a few campaigns, particularly the Sanders campaign, do really well on Reddit over the years.
Yeah, and I'll add one thing here. I said it for Reddit, but I want to kind of say it for all social media platforms. I think we take this for granted on Facebook because everyone at this point has experienced Facebook in one way or another. If you are looking to put ads on a social media platform and you have never been a user on that platform, take a beat first to download the app or get on the platform and get familiar with it, because they are specific communities, specific styles, and that is the best way to make your ad content make sense.
I will say it was a revelation when I downloaded TikTok for the first time. As an older millennial, it was highly entertaining for me.
Let's talk about YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of video platforms, let's talk about one of the kind of like OG original platforms, but still one of the biggest platforms available out there in terms of streaming. I consider this the biggest streaming platform. Of course, you can talk about Hulu's and the Roku's, et cetera, but I think they've been doing it for so long and they've been doing it well. But I think, of course, the content is a little bit different in comparison to, say, the Hulu's of the world. But it has a lot of variability. They're skippable, there are non-skippable ad units, there are a lot of different formats, 6-second, 15-second, 30-second. But there are some things that are drawbacks. You can't do list matching, so you can't do an exclusion list. But at the same, if you're a political advertiser, but what it does offer you is a lot of reach and a lot of data. And I think this is one platform that I think works well with a particular populist message. There's also a number of different creative things you can do with your ads to make them stand out and pop. We've seen a lot of success with this. From a number of different senders, from a number of different statewide campaigns, and of course we've seen success with it on the other side of the aisle. So this is certainly a platform not to be ignored, and I consider this one of the bigger tests to consider. Here's the thing, though. A little tip on YouTube. YouTube takes a little bit more time to optimize than Facebook. Facebook, as we know, you are able to kind of put your ads up, see what happens, and you usually get pretty good data within 24 to 48 hours of whether or not your campaign is going to work. YouTube's a different story. YouTube takes time for that data to accumulate. It actually takes time for the algorithms to work properly because there's just so many different levers that the Google engine is pulling to make these ads work. So typically a YouTube test may take more like 2 to 3 weeks in order to give you a grasp of whether or not something's going to work for you. But it is a platform that we definitely look at.
Let's take us back in time a little bit to list rentals. List rentals have been overlooked recently because, they've been around a while. But there are some really nice pros to list rentals. The first, you know exactly how many leads you're getting. The cost is fixed. There's different vendors and that cost is different. But when you go into it, you know what you're getting back. I'm going to put the nice caveat here of the quality based on the vendor changes. Do your research. We're not going to dig into that here, but I like to put that asterisk. And then the all caps version, do not buy openers. I could do a whole different hour on that specifically, but the value of list rentals where someone specifically is doing an action, knows who you are, is already showing an interest in your ad and your content, in your issue or campaign. That is a quality name, a quality lead. On the flip side, list rentals, a lot of these lists were built over time and a bit ago. Not that they're worse activists, but they tend to be older, they tend to be whiter. So that is something to note about list rentals. If you need a chunk of, I need people to send letters right now, this might be a really nice spot for you. If you want a broader, more diverse, younger community, list rentals might not be the option for you. Native advertising. Native advertising is a really, really big, broad topic, but it's an ad that matches where you're seeing it. It's also called sponsored content. We put some platforms on here, but native advertising are the ads that they almost look like articles. They are really like in the content engaged. So let me just pull up an example, although I love this meme. Here, more articles of interest, but there's an ad hidden in there. Y'all are advertisers, you probably saw this right away. But native advertising, the idea is that it is worked in and it's both subtle in the fact that it's an ad, but you also have to make the content catch people's eye. And that balance can be really interesting, but really impactful if done correctly.
And of course, the last but not least, wanted to give you a preview into the world of programmatic. Programmatic advertising, it's, obviously, I think it's a big buzzword, but I'm hoping to kind of demystify it just a little bit for you today. But, you have to think of programmatic less of like a specific media, but more so as a method of buying. So, it's not a type of ad specifically, it's the way it is placed. And what it is simply buying ads through a web interface across the kind of the whole or the larger internet landscape. So you can buy across news sites, you can buy across entertainment sites, you can you can create deals with CNN or New York Times, etc. This is a way to access higher quality inventory without necessarily having to pay really high quality prices. It is certainly an option to kind of get in the weeds a little bit more and find some sites that can work for you specifically. And the cool thing is, it's not necessarily display, it's not necessarily video, it's all OTT. It's kind of a lot of those different things. And there's a lot of options available to you when you buy programmatic. One of the things that's tough about programmatic is how do you get started? It's a lot to ingest when you're first learning how to do programmatic ads. I'd recommend starting off with what I call kind of like low involvement tools. So opt for more like managed service vendors. Think of like Resonate or Media IQ, people who are going to work with you in the programmatic marketplace, but they're going to be more so hands-on managing the campaigns than you are. So you may not even have to see the inside of an interface when you work with certain vendors. Then, as you get more advanced, or as you learn more about the marketplace, you can begin to opt for more self-service vendors, such as StackAdapt is one, Xandr, that's the big Warner Media / AT&T version, Basis, which is run by Centro, another good one that we like using here in-house, OneView, which is run by Roku. These are more hands-on vendors where it does require you to be a little bit more hands-on keys, but at the same time, if you are experienced with putting together a Facebook button, or if you've worked in Ads Manager before in Facebook, and do that relatively well, you can pick up one of these programmatic platforms relatively quickly. And there are and then there are some of these platforms have no minimums, and some of these platforms have very easy to use and transparent tools and offer a lot of support. definitely an opportunity to kind of expand beyond what's available on Facebook. And of course, with something new like this, there's certainly a little bit of hesitancy that people may have. But I would say, don't be too afraid. It's not going to bite you too bad, and they have a lot of service options that'll make sure that your campaigns are on track.
All right, switch gears. Lots of platforms. How do you know what works for you? I know we've got quite a diverse set of folks in the audience. The easiest question, the most obvious question, what is your goal? I split this out into two big categories. Do you want someone to respond with an action? Is this a direct response campaign? You want leads, you want people to sign on, send a letter or donate, sign up for an event. Those are going to be a different set of platforms because it's going to be platforms where people can click to a landing page. People are comfortable leaving where they are and going to a new page. And a different set of creative also. On the flip side, do you want to be giving information, want people to absorb information? And the political side, obviously persuasion advertising, voter education and mobilization. But even inside of this bucket, there are some differences. Is your ad content all the information? Is that the 15 to 30 seconds you give them what they need? Or are you looking for people to click through to more info? Examples recently, like vaccine education. There's a lot of nuance there. And a lot of these campaigns, we actually really want people clicking through to get more info, find a vaccine near them. That would be a different set of platforms even than other persuasion or education campaigns. So I want to dig in a little bit on lead generation, that first part I was talking about, because this is where Facebook ads really still are a top performer. Facebook is a place where people are comfortable clicking on ads, being political, signing petitions, and engaging with content. So looking for other options inside of lead generation is really, I think, where we want to spend a bit of time. I've already talked about list rentals, the pluses and minuses. I put again, not list purchases. I think it is really, as Facebook gets harder to use or people are turning away from it, it's a pretty easy revert to, oh, well, somebody is offering me a list I can just purchase, or a set of names that I can buy and just have in hand. There are very, very unique cases where people might make that choice, but I want to caution, as more and more people start to make that choice, it is going to impact email programs and deliverability. And, as the general space, the answer to we can't get people to opt in isn't we'll take people that didn't. There are other options out there. That is why we are here.
Just to quickly jump in there, I think it's also a matter of somewhat respecting people's privacy. I think people are accustomed to how brands treat them, and they are not emailed by random brands because they signed up for another brand. I think there's certainly laws and restrictions around U.S. campaign laws that I think that we in the political space have kind of skirted it a little bit. But because of how normal that behavior is by brands, when if you purchase just straight names, it becomes more problematic because people are accustomed to these behaviors. So when you do get a random email, it's a little bit weird when it does show up. So that's another good reason why we want to make sure that we're respecting our audiences and make sure people are opting in as opposed to just getting these names out of nowhere.
Yeah, and just building a sustainable community. The people who want to be on your list are going to be better people on your list. They're going to be better activists. They're going to be better donors. Finding ways to get in front of them, and not having Facebook. We experienced that in after the election. It was hard, but the answer is not to kind of turn away. It's to lean into other opportunities. Mm-hmm. So, we've been talking about them some. We'll talk about them some more. native and programmatic, they require some testing. It requires some nuance to find your audience. It might require larger budgets depending on the platform or depending what you're trying to do. But it doesn't always. And then the last piece too is for lead generation, there's been this conventional wisdom that static ads are the best option. The digital landscape is becoming more video focused, short videos, animations. We're really starting to see that rise, and you can get direct response leads from that. So, the silliest example is, of course, all of the direct donate ads where the candidate's talking direct to camera. I'm once again asking you, but those work, and that video for direct response is working when the video is right, when the content is right and feels natural. So a lot of video platforms have been written off as not the right place for actions, and we're just starting to see that change in the space.
And I think there's something certainly there's something to a direct ask of a candidate or of someone who's a speaker for a brand or for a cause. Actually making that direct ask and connecting with the user through video, and I think that's something that's special that video offers that you can't necessarily get off a static newsfeed.
I want to make one more comment too, which is video feels like it's also a much bigger lift to create, but low quality video is okay. Just right now, people on the internet are video creators. It's just been a shift. You don't need a TV ready ad spot to put up a digital video. And that's a really big change and should really empower a lot of us to lean into video content.
So one of the bigger things to think about as you're testing, as you're coming up with new vendors, new programs other than Facebook, is understand your audience. Who are you trying to reach? Who are you trying to build your list to? And I think there's certainly ways to kind of design the list, or there's certainly some ways to kind of reach out. But at the same time, if you're thinking about building younger lists, or if you're thinking about building more diverse lists, then again, I think as we mentioned, a straight list rental campaign probably isn't the best way to go. So you can think about, Snapchat, you can think about YouTube, you can think about TikTok, other places where these audiences live. And to be quite honest with you, some of these people don't live on Facebook. They live more on Instagram, and Instagram has its own. That's technically part of the Facebook as well, but let's not discuss that either. But I think this is kind of just an opportunity for you to just basically take a look and understand what are you trying to build, and then choose your platforms accordingly, and choose the platforms that kind of index for the audience that you're trying to build. Definitely something to keep in mind as you go.
Yeah, and the caution of not going too far in the other direction. Oh, there are no young people on Facebook anymore, so we must go to TikTok. Young people are on other places. You don't need to that's the only place to find certain group of people. So just not oversimplifying your audience either is really important. And I think that's, again, that could be a whole different hour, but really trying to be where your audience is without always just assuming where your audience is.
Mm-hmm. Now getting into kind of your platforms and efforts. I think the classic thing is if you have more money, you have more options. You have more options to test. You can try different things. But not every campaign out there just has like $100,000 lying around. Let's just be honest. And let alone $100,000 to test on things that are relatively unproven. So my advice here is be mindful of, as you have smaller budgets, that doesn't mean, oh no, I have a small budget, I can't test. That's a big lie. You can scale your tests. You can be selective of your platforms. You don't necessarily have to choose every single platform we mentioned on this program. You don't even have to. You don't even have to do them all at the same time. You can start with YouTube, then go to Snapchat, then go to others as they prove their worth and prove return to you. There are also systems that can work with smaller budgets. For example, native ads. You don't necessarily need like $10,000 to test native ads. You could probably pull off a decent campaign of native ads from $2,000 to $5,000 and have a decent data that can give you an understanding of whether or not you're going to get a positive signal or whether or not this test is going to work for you or not. But at the very least, it'll give you some decent learnings of whether you can continue on and optimize further on the system. There are some systems that do require a little bit more time to optimize. I would say that programmatic is one of them. That does take a little bit more time because you are dealing with a cookie-based conversion action, and it needs to read when those conversions do happen. Similar thing, even with YouTube. YouTube needs a little bit more time to optimize just because of just how big of a platform it is and how many signals it needs in order for it to work. And give you kind of like a perfect understanding of how much your CPA is going to live and be over on YouTube. So understand that and continue to kind of scale your budgets as you go. Let's flip to the next slide, and this is a test. This is a sample of a big program. I think one of the things that we were fortunate enough to have was a client who did have a budget and a client who was mad at Facebook and wanted to try other things purposefully and see if these things worked out for us. Of all these tests, I can tell you only 2 to 3 of them really did, as well as we wanted them to. Others didn't do great. But at the same time, it does give you an understanding of like the breadth of what is available out there. That being said, again, if you have a smaller budget, then don't let this scare you too much. You can find a couple $1,000s and see if that can work on Twitter, or if you're a C3 campaign, or you can attempt to see if something will work out on Snapchat. Those can be tested for lower ends of the spectrum. Same thing with a native vendor.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in. We tested these and only a few worked for this specific organization client with their specific audience. Again, your people are not going to per se be everywhere, and that is okay too. So what works for one group might not work for another group. Where Facebook does feel ubiquitous in a lot of ways because they did capture so much of the US population at a certain time, or global population, really. Some platforms are not. And that's, finding what's right for you is really important there. I also want to say, we did not test all these things at the same time. We didn't test all these things with the same creative and same message. We did not, each platform, when you go in and you test, giving it the opportunity, giving it the thought that it requires. Because if you're trying to mass test, if you do find yourself in a situation with a big budget, testing something but not testing it with the right creative or the right message or the right audience in mind is not going to help you narrow down what works for you either.
And one other thing to consider is timing of your tests. So for example, if you're doing YouTube, you're not spending $10,000 in one day. That would be crazy. That'd be impressive, but that would also be crazy. But it's one of those things where it's like you might want to start off with something that's a little bit simpler, with like $150 or $200 per day, so that you're testing over time. You're giving the creative time to optimize. You're giving the platform time to optimize, and you're learning as you go. And it gives you the leeway to say, after week 2 or week 3, and you see kind of like the trends in the data, And if it's not trending the right direction, you can walk away. So just because it says this number in a line item on this sheet doesn't mean you don't have to play the entire bet. You can walk away from the table when you want.
We are ready to talk more about testing.
Yeah, and I think I might have already jumped to the conclusion.
I know.
But might have gotten ahead of myself. But the idea here is you got to test. You have to try it. Yeah. If you don't try, then you'll never know if something's going to work or not. So I think it's one of those things where I believe that it's important to kind of just, again, don't dive headfirst into a test. Dip your toe into the water, understand your KPIs, know what you are, what you would consider your goal KPI, as in like, let's say your CPA goal is like $3 to $5, depending on your audience. But at the same time, know your maximum. Know the maximum amount you're willing to pay for that member, that audience, because you might get to a situation with, say, Facebook, or excuse me, for YouTube, where you start off at like a $20 CPA. That might be too much to start off, but in week 2 or week 3, you get down to like a $10 CPA. And understanding whether or not that $10 is a cliff point for you, whether or not the people that YouTube is bringing in is actually quality, and examining that over that time, it just gives you the ability to kind of really analyze the data and analyze whether or not things are working positively, and you can make your decisions from there.
Yeah, and I think I want to add, this is why John and I are both here. This is where I go into something, I had an idea, I want to test this platform, it's going to be amazing, I'm so excited. And John's like, all right, but let's put a number on this. What are we really looking for? What do we want here? What are we willing to do? What are we willing to put up with? Because you might enter a test, if you don't set your clear KPIs at the beginning, you enter a test and you're like, well, it's getting better from 20, it's at 10 now. And you need either actual John or either John inside your head saying, okay, but is $10 really good enough? Yes, better than 20, but is that worth it? Is this working? So really balancing the optimism and the willing to try and jump in with being clear and setting goals.
Exactly. It comes back to the science of media, which I really enjoy. It's creating the hypotheses and testing, and whether or not, and designing an experiment to see whether or not you're right or wrong. And I think that's half the fun.
Sweet. Well, we are really excited to see some questions. Please use the chat feature because we cannot hear or see you, but we can get your chats and answer some questions. I also have our email addresses up here if you want to reach out specifically to either or both of us. Please feel free. John is Berkeley-based. I am DC-based. I'll volunteer myself for coffee. I have a coffee problem. I drink too much of it, so I'm always willing to meet people and talk over coffee as well in a COVID-safe way. Questions? Sweet, we have a question. Twitter has denied my C3 nonprofit board from running ads. Do you have resources on how to appeal a decision by Twitter?
I'm not sure if this is one where I'd say if you apply directly, that might be difficult. If you have a Twitter rep, and I think I've had the same Twitter rep for a few years now, even though they've gotten rid of political specifically, but at least from the C3 perspective, we're still able to reach out to her and kind of at least get an understanding of why the decision was made, or whether or not we can appeal. So I think that one is that one requires a little bit of outreach to the Twitter team to see if you can get some some feedback on that directly. That one's a little bit harder, unfortunately. They're a little bit more arcane as far as their practices and whether or not they allow certain CPs or not. So it's one of the harder parts of Twitter to work with, but when it does work, fingers crossed, it does.
Our next question. Do you have recommendations of platforms specifically for trying to engage people of color and especially young people of color?
I don't think we have specific platforms. I think this comes down to how you target down to your platforms. I think, a lot of systems have gotten rid of, even Facebook, for example, have gotten rid of the ability to target down to POC specifically, which is a little bit harder to do. I think you have to kind of target around them as opposed to just like, you can just click Latinx. I think the reason for that is due to past discrimination policies, past discrimination practices by certain other vendors or organizations. But it's certainly possible to target in a way that's a little bit more interest-based. And I think that's also a means of kind of understanding your creatives and making sure they're speaking to certain interests. And I think that is kind of the way that we want to target down to for people of color as opposed to a very specific platform.
What are some success stories or case studies of innovative digital advertising?
Ooh.
Yeah, trying to think about what I can say in an anonymized way off the top of my head, which is interesting. We were working with folks who invested time to try to locate their very specific audience on programmatic. Programmatic has a lot of interests that you can target, and there's also, based on other sites that you visit or that people would visit, that type of interest. And we were looking for an industry, a niche, and we've also done that with looking for a very specific work sector and trying to find folks who are that job. Sorry to be so general, but giving programmatic time to find a really small audience, a really specific audience. I think one of the things that Facebook advertising has that we're trying to locate other places is that interest target, that ability to find folks not just on geography, not just on demographics, but based on behaviors. And programmatic is a really good way to keep that going. I also really love a very specific geofence. I know that John might not feel exactly the same way. I love a very specific geofence. I think if you've got a target audience, that a lot of those folks are going to be in one place. That a lot of those folks turn out to certain types of events. I think that you can do some really cool stuff with a geofence like that. I'll put an example, like people who turn out to a big rivalry college football game. Everyone in the area is talking about that, thinking about that. It's usually pretty state-based. It's usually younger. You get a diverse set of people. Targeting that geofence, that area for a certain time, capturing device IDs in that area could be interesting. So I will leave that. But John, I'm sure you have other examples.
Geofencing can be a lot of fun. I think there are some technologies now, as well as some of these systems where you can literally, it'll give you a Google map and you can draw points on the map and you can create a custom radius. And that's going to be where you're going to be serving your advertising. You can also do look back functions of that, where we can say people who have been in this area between X day and X day, and we want to serve them advertisement. This was actually a tactic that was, I'm going to use this, worked surprisingly for the Trump campaign, because they geofenced their big rallies, and people who attended the rallies are just people who are around for those. That is something that they did that helped kind of continue to gain more interest, or continue to gain more data on their audiences and message them effectively. So that's specific to events. But I could also think about this if you're thinking of like a younger audience. You could do this for college campuses, right? I can do a geofence around the University of California, Berkeley right now, which is like 300 feet that way, and that's a way that I can reach, say, voters who I need to mobilize, because for people, college students tend to not have their voter registration in order a lot. So that's something that is a considerable success story for advertising. I love pointing to video as an innovative example. I think it's just one of my favorite mediums, working in digital. And I think there's so much that on YouTube, for example, there's so many different styles of ads that you can create. There's the kind of like the countdown ads, where you can be like, oh, you have like 10 seconds to like take an action, which is kind of fun. But I think there's a lot of for those of us who are here, we probably have seen a lot of Stacey Abrams ads calling us to give to the DSCC and others. We might have seen Schumer ads pretty recently as well. So I think those are some good examples of like ways that we can connect a little bit further and have that kind of like face, show off what it means and who you're actually giving to, and what are you actually trying to do. So I think that's an excellent example of some of the good work that's being done in the marketplace.
Cool. John, you actually kind of started to touch on our next question, which is specifically about like, how would you break into video? If we've never done any type of video advertising, how would you break in without a large budget?
So it doesn't necessarily have to be, I think the first thing that we've discussed is that it's not, you don't need super high production values. These phones have just amazing cameras on them, and I've got a white background right here, and we could video a candidate, and that takes 2 minutes. And or for that matter, let's say you have just straight static ads. How many static ads do you have? 3, 4, 5? If you have a basic like video editing platform, you can take those 3, 4, 5 ads, loop them, and you have a video, and then you can add a quick soundtrack. It's one of those things where it takes just a little bit of editing, and I think the tools that are just available out there are so much more powerful than they were 10 years ago. You don't need to be an After Effects wizard in order to create great video. You only really need 3 good shots and some music. You don't even really need the music, just a little bit of audio. So I think that's the idea from a creative standpoint. Don't worry too much about the assets about creating completely new assets. It's more so just you can farm out previous assets from you see just Emily. I see you have here assets from live streams, events. So it doesn't have to be the greatest quality in the world in order for it to work. So actually, here's one example. Of course, maybe I'm using too many Trump examples, but at the same time, it's useful to learn from them. They would take just straight video of people at the rally and use that as an ad. And one of the best examples of that is that they had a UFC fighter, Jorge Masvidal, who was kind of he's pretty impressive in the South Beach, Miami community. He giving kind of his endorsement, but at the same time, the ad was literally just like him at the rally speaking for a minute. And all you need is that kind of asset, something that's grabbing, something that from a speaker that you can use. So it doesn't. I'd say just it takes a little bit of creativity, but it doesn't take a whole lot of production.
I'll jump in also. We've done ads for climate groups and environmental groups that is just slideshows of really beautiful landscapes and places that we're working to protect. We did a 15-second video of a running waterfall. It had the sound already built in, and it just said protect this at the bottom with the button. So that's like, your video also doesn't have to be, you can think about video as a moving version of what your static ad would have been. It doesn't need to be a video of someone doing something. On the same side, we've also done video ads that are static ads, but the button flashes. Or there's a little bit of animation to catch attention to make it work on a platform like YouTube, where you couldn't just put an image up. And we've actually seen that do pretty well. Just getting in front of people, making it really easy to digest. You have their attention for a split second, 3 seconds if you're lucky, 6 seconds before they can skip it. What do you do with that time? Could be really simple. It doesn't have to be even a video in the sense that we think about, like you're watching me speak right now. It could be, picture of the screen right here with a button that says "Watch our presentation" flashing in the corner, and that would be as impactful. I'm going to skip because I really like the next question. Email surveys asking your list how they spend their time online. Have those been effective in producing quality answers to build programmatic targets? I love the way you think. I love the idea of you leveraging the audience you currently have to learn about the audience that you want to find, but you don't even have to do it in such an express way. And I want to ask John to tell me about lookalike audiences.
Well, I think lookalike audiences are not limited to our friends at Facebook. You can build lookalike audiences on other platforms. There are other lookalike vendors out there who can deliver that audience off of programmatic onto a programmatic space. So it doesn't have to be just a straight live ramp upload and this is all you can do. You can modify and adjust this audience as well. I think one thing that's interesting that you note about email surveys and asking them about how they spend their time online, you don't necessarily need to email them to figure out how they spend their time online. There are tools, right? Hot tip. There are tools out there such as Viant, which runs a Delphic, which is a programmatic platform, but they have an audience tool that allows you to upload certain audiences and then it will spit back indexes of where they are spending their time, what they are consuming, which platforms they're consuming, and what are they indexing higher for. And it also kind of gives you some insights on the list itself, whereas like you may not want to do a full survey asking for your list demographics, but you can do these uploads and it can spit out some of these demographics for you. Of course, again, we're running into the issue of user privacy, but at the same time, because these are opted-in users, different story. When they are an owned list that you have. So it is something that you can data mine as opposed to having to ask them specifically. The name of the platform is Adelphic. And I don't know, can I write in the chat too?
No, you can't.
Oh.
I will also add, while I love email surveys, because that's your most engaged folks telling you things. People don't honestly represent how they spend their time. If someone sent me, what sites do you visit often email, I probably wouldn't tell you how often I spend time looking at shoes I don't buy. A lot of time on websites being like, those are pretty, and then realizing that I will never, ever buy them or wear them. But an ad on that site would have my attention. So there's pieces like, I think for social media, knowing where people spend their time, that might be easier, but just where I am on the web, how much time I actually do spend on YouTube watching how-to videos for things I, again, probably won't end up doing. This might just be a me trend. Audiences learning about me. I don't consider myself a active YouTuber, but of course I do go to it occasionally for this and that. So I do caution that email surveys can be difficult because people don't always know where they're spending their time or want to represent where they're spending their time.
And I think that's also hard. And we've run into this issue for kind of just electoral campaigns. And when we put a poll out there, oftentimes we'll try to have like a media consumption question. But the results that come back from that are just so wildly different from what we actually know is available in the marketplace and the actual data. It's like, where do you get your news sources? Where do you get your news from? Oftentimes it's going to be Facebook and Google, but at the same time, the people who will fill out these videos are probably going to hit like CNN more often than not, because they don't want to be lumped into the group that actually gets their news from Facebook. But I think that goes back to the idea of kind of like trust in platforms as well. There could be an understanding of like what platforms do you trust or what systems do you trust. So that's something. There are ways to potentially frame that question a little differently.
The trust thing actually brings up a point we did not touch on, which is the same way that you can build places to put your ads on programmatic, you can also have a site list of places not to put your ads. So when we run programmatic ads, we are not on Breitbart. We are not on certain sites that we would never want our content to appear or look like we were, promoting them as an entity. So I do think that's important as well.
I have a list of thousands of sites where we will not appear. Most programmatic systems have their own either work with Oracle or Grapeshot or other platforms that make sure that you are not appearing on fraudulent traffic or not appearing on brand unsafe traffic. You can stay away from those things. But for something like Fox News, for example, you can have this conversation with your clients. Fox News could potentially be a place where you can sway people from the other side into an idea, but it can also be a place where it's just not going to work. And that's going to be a news site that's going to pass through most filters. So think about those sites specifically, and whether or not that's something you want to be a fit in or you want to see your ads
on. There are no more questions in the chat. I want to keep encouraging people to add questions. I've just reached Go Bears, which
Go Bears.
I'm for John. I am a Duke grad and can talk college sports and too much enthusiasm for a while, but I don't think anyone needs to hear that. Or anything else folks want to ask us in this moment? Again, really encourage y'all, if you have questions, thoughts, specifics, or just want to hear more about what we do, this is why we're here, to knowledge share and get to know other people in the progressive community. So please.
Or even if you don't want to hear more about what we do and just want to just shoot us a line and be social and talk to other people who are facing the same problems you are on a day-to-day basis, that's cool too. So happy to chat. Cool.
All right.
I think we're good.
I think we're good as well. Thank you, everyone. Oh, we got a question. Do you suggest having a backup plan for a Facebook ads blackout or implementing ads across didn't read that right, or implementing ads across other platforms slowly?
Ideally, do your testing now. I think always have a backup plan, just in case. But your backup plan is going to be that much better if you do your testing now, or if you do kind of like your analysis of platforms while you can, while Facebook is still up or it's still going. Because I think it's important to get those learnings and adjust your backup plan accordingly. There's some backup plans that we have, but some of them are more dicier than others. But there are others that are just very solid that we're ready if something were to happen. Try to move on relatively quickly.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, who came to hear us talk about this. This is something Jen and I talk about with each other a lot, all the time. So it's really fun that we got a group of people who wanted to come hear about it and learn. Okay.
Thanks so much for everyone who came today. We're really excited to hear from you.